campaign to suppress bandits in northeast China was a counterinsurgency, counter-guerrilla campaign fought between the bandits-turned-guerrillas, allied with nationalists and the communists during Chinese Civil War in the post-World War II era, and resulted in the communist victory. Strategies. Both sides had made grave miscalculations initially, but the communists were quicker to correct their miscalculation and immediately adjust their strategy to achieve final victory. The nationalists, on the other hand, were overconfident and did not modify their strategy quickly enough, resulting in the failure. This had serious consequences later on, as their communist enemy had successfully stabilized their rear area when winning the campaign. Nationalist strategy. Just as the nationalists had attempted to fight guerrilla and insurgency warfare against the communists after being driven from mainland China half a decade later, the grave strategic mistake made by the nationalists contributed at least equally if not greater than the enemy's political and military pressure to the nationalist defeat in this campaign. The very first strategic mistake made by Chiang Kai-shek and his followers was when they had neither the sufficient troops nor enough transportation assets to be deployed into the Japanese-occupied regions of northeast China. Unwilling to let these regions falling into communist hands, Chiang's government ordered these bandits to fight communists in any way they could. This grave strategic miscalculation resulted in alienation and resentment to the nationalists by the local population, which had already blamed the nationalists for losing the regions to the Japanese invaders during the war. However, the bandits were deeply feared and hated by the local populace they plagued for so long, and nationalist troops left behind joining the bandits certainly did not help them win the support of the general population. In fact, it served the exact opposite. It caused Chiang's government to lose popular support to the least, if not strengthening the popular support of their communist enemy. The second grave strategic miscalculation made by the retreating nationalists was also similar to the one the nationalists had made when it attempted to simultaneously solve the warlord problem that had plagued China for so long with the problem of the exterminating communists together. Those warlords allied with Chiang's nationalist regime were only interested in keeping their own power and defected to the Japanese side when Japanese invaders offered to let them keep their power in exchange for their collaborations. After World War II, these forces of former Japanese puppet regimes once again returned to the nationalist camp for the same reason they defected to the Japanese invaders. Obviously, it was difficult for Chiang to immediately get rid of these warlords for good as soon as they surrendered to Chiang and rejoined nationalists, because such move would alienate other factions within the nationalist ranks, and those bandits and former Japanese puppet regimes warlords could still help the nationalists by holding onto what was under their control and fighting off communists, and they and the communists would both be weakened. Similarly, the bandits Chiang's government had failed to exterminate were obviously not good candidates for neither joining the regular troops nor being honorably discharged, and using them to fight communists appeared to be the only logical alternative. If the communists were greatly weakened by the bandits, then the nationalists would have easier time in their counterattacks to retake China. If the bandits were defeated, then the nationalists would have easier job to eradicate them later after retaking China. However, just like those warlords, these bandits were mostly only interested in keeping their own power also, and thus did not put in any real efforts to fight the communists like some of the nationalists who were dedicated to their political cause. The eradication of bandits by the communist regime only strengthened its popular support, since previous governments dating back from Qing dynasty had failed to do so. The third grave strategic miscalculation made by the retreating nationalist regime was similar to the second one, but this one was about its own troops left behind during the Second Sino-Japanese War. The resource-strained nationalist government could not provide enough supports to these troops left behind the enemy lines. who were forced to turn to banditry for survival when they were left on their own, and this had alienated many of the troops left behind, and it was impossible to expect them to fight their communist enemy with the same kind of dedication like those nationalist agents who believed in the political cause, or the American-trained new forces. The banditry also alienated the local populace and caused the nationalists to lose popular support, compounding the problem, due to the need of bandits' knowledge of local area, and the fact that they were the only pro-nationalist force in the region. They were often rewarded with higher ranks than the highly trained regular nationalist troops sent to northeast China. As a result, the regular nationalist troops sent to northeast China after World War II lacked any willingness to work together with the bandits, especially when many of the bandits were former warlords. As troops cooperated with Japanese invaders, many loyal nationalists were enraged by the fact that they had to serve under the former enemy they once fought. In all, Chiang's government awarded bandits with many high military ranks: 32 commander-in-chiefs, 33 army commanders, and 158 division commanders in all. In contrast, the highly trained regular nationalist army sent to northeast China after World War II had much fewer similar ranks, meaning that most highly qualified professional officers ranked below bandits. Meanwhile, the bandits lacked the similar willingness and attempted to expend those nationalist troops whenever they could to save their own skin, and often used the superior ranks Chiang's government given to them as their excuses to ignore correct strategies ordered by the nationalist regular army. The fourth grave strategic miscalculation made by the Chiang government was financial, economical. Due to the lack of money, those bandits turned guerrillas were not sufficiently provided with supplies and money. The bandits turned guerrilla had no problem of looting the local population to get what they need, as they had done for decades, which inevitably drove the general popular support further into the communist side. The little financial support provided by the nationalists was simply not enough to support such guerrilla and insurgency warfare on such a large scale. When the country was in desperate need of resources to recover from the devastation of war, another unexpected but disastrous result of the insufficient financial support was that it had greatly eroded the support of the nationalists within its own ranks. The wealthy landowners and businessmen were the strong supporters of Chiang's government, and as their properties were confiscated by the communists and redistributed to the poor, their hatred toward the communist regime was enough to cause many of them to stay behind voluntarily to fight behind the enemy line. However, the landowners and businessmen were also long-time victims of bandits due to their wealth, and suffered even more than the general populace, as these former landowners and businessmen turned guerrilla fighters were ordered to join their former bandits who once threatened, looted, kidnapped and even killed them and their relatives. It was obvious that such cooperation was in name only and cannot produce any actual benefits, and the alienation and discontent toward the nationalist regime harbored by these once ardent nationalists would only grow greater. Another problem for the nationalists was the strong disagreement among themselves over how to fight the war against their communist enemy. While some preferred to fight a total war, incapacitate the enemy's ability to fight, but this inevitably conflicted with the interest of another faction of strong supporters of the nationalist regime, the landowners and businessmen, who joined bandits to oppose such tactic. The reason was that landowners and businessmen supporting and joining the nationalist guerrilla firmly believed that the nationalists would be able to exterminate the communists within several months, and they would be able to regain their lost lands, businesses, and other properties that were confiscated and redistributed to the poor by the communists. As some of the nationalists suggested, and destroyed the production facilities and businesses as part of the total war, the landowners and businessmen would not be able to regain any valuable properties after the return of the nationalist regime because those properties had been destroyed. The bandits agreed with the businessmen and landowners to oppose the idea of total war for a different reason. When the properties were destroyed and productivity dropped, they would not be able to loot enough supply to survive. As a result, despite the animosities between the bandits and landowners and businessmen, they were united together in the opposition to those nationalists advocating a total war. This strategic difference meant that despite being interrupted, the rear area of communists was not destroyed and remained intact so that a continuous supply could be provided for the communists' war efforts, which ultimately led to their final victory. Communist strategy. Communists, like their nationalist counterparts, also made a grave miscalculation, but in comparison to the nationalists, the communists were very quick in correcting their miscalculation and avoided disasters nationalists had suffered. The communist miscalculation was only made in the initial stage when they first ventured into northeast China after World War II. During the start of their campaign to establish communist base in northeast China, communists were eager to expand their force in region. But most of the communist force sent to northeast China did not reach their final destination, especially after the Battle of Shanhai Pass. Although the communists managed to send more than 270,000 troops to northeast China, most of them were contained in Rihe, Chaha, Suiyuan by the nationalist forces. Although most of these areas belonged to the communist northeast China military region, the communist force contained there was not much of help in supporting their comrades in Manchuria. The problem of the lack of soldiers was further compounded by the need to enlist troops who knew the local area, and as a result, the communists made into Manchuria made grave miscalculation and concentrate on expanding their numbers by enlist the help of local bandits. However, the economically deprived communists were obviously no match for the better-conditioned nationalists who could provide more resources. And as a result, when the communists began to abandon large cities in northeast China in their retreat, most bandits that first temporarily sided with communists defected to the nationalists in battalions and regiments, or even in brigades. For example, in a single communist base to the north of Changchun alone, over 33,200 former bandit-turned-communist troops turned against the communists by the end of December 1945. Communists responded rapidly to the situation. At the end of November 1945, communists in the communist base to the north of Changchun held its conference on bandit eradication. Ing decided to send out communist guerrillas to the regions with weak communist control. In addition to military operations, the communist guerrillas were also charged with political tasks of mobilizing local populace, especially the lower-class peasantry, to fight bandits. On the 2nd of December 1945, Songjiang communist leaders held a conference for the similar purposes. Ing decided to stop expanding communist forces purely based on numbers. Instead, the communist force would be strengthened by political purification. These two tactics became the foundation bases on which the communist bandit eradication campaign strategies would later develop, which eventually expanded into three major parts. The first part was to send a large number of communist cadres to the rural area to mobilizing the local populace. Once the local population was rallied to the communist side. In addition, bandits' secret base in remote locations hidden in the forest and mountains were revealed by the local populace, thus cutting off bandit supply. The second part was to increase political pressure against the bandits by continuously launching psychological propaganda, political assaults on the bandits, pressuring them into surrender. The military part was mainly involved in concentrating force to fight bandits, targeting the largest bands of bandits first, so that when they were exterminated, it would send shockwaves to smaller bands of bandits. Construction of fortifications was a must to protect the communist-controlled area. Mobile strike force was also a must in pursuing the bandits, and cavalry's troops riding in vehicles and trains were assigned this task. Land reform had played a very important role in the eventual communist victory because when the tenant peasants obtained their own land, their support for the communists strengthened. In accordance with their strategy, communists reorganized their forces. In Songjiang, military and administrative committee was formed, with Zhang Jushan as the secretary, and Bandit Extermination Command was also formed, with order to exterminate bandits given. In Heilongjiang, communists decided to strengthen their control of Keshan, secure Baiquan, and then take Yan, and finally, relieve Daju that was under siege. Communists of other region in northeast China also made plans to exterminate bandits before the complete withdrawal of Red Army. From 20 to 28 December 1945, Hejiang, disambiguation needed. Communists decided on their meetings to exterminate bandits in Yilan and Huashuang counties. To strengthen their force in the campaign, communists deployed regular army from other area, including Shandong 7th Division, 3rd Division of the new 4th Army, Tiansong Squadron, and 359th Brigade. These regular units would fight side by side with the 10,000-member-strong communist militia established during the campaign. Prelude. Due to the grave communist blunder, nationalists had an upper hand in the initial struggle for the control of northeast China. Despite reaching the region before the nationalists could, vast majority portion of the region was dominated by the bandits sided with the nationalists. Bandits under the command of Ma Yuichuan with more than 18,000 troops, including artillery and cavalry, controlled most of Nenjiang, and attacked martial art temple region of Intailai County, succeeded in killing the communist commander-in-chief of Tailai military sub-region, Zhang Pingyang. The vital communication line between the region to the north of Changchun and south of Changchun was controlled by 3,000 bandits headed by Ma Zishan and Zheng Yunfeng. Communist-controlled trains were constantly ambushed and the greatest casualties suffered in an ambush exceeded 100. In Hejiang, disambiguation needed. Over 20,000 bandits under the command of Li Hutang and Xie Wendong struck numerous times, including successfully killing Sun Ziling, the communist deputy mayor of Jiamuza. However, the bandits made a serious blunder when they indiscriminately murdered more than 200 innocent ethnic Korean civilians in 3 villages in execution style in Masan County. Even babies of several weeks old were not spared. The mass execution and the subsequent burning down of every building in the village had outraged the local populace, and ethnic Koreans in the local area were firmly allied with communists as a result. In Heilongjiang, the rear area of communists in northeast China, the bandits were most numerous, totaling more than 70,000. All received ranks and titles from Chiang's government because the nationalists planned to use them to harass the rear area of their communist enemy. The largest band of bandits were headed by Shang Qiyu, totaling over 10,000, struck many times, succeeding raiding communist-held areas numerous times. In Yunnan County, Secretary Zhao Guang was ambushed and killed when he was sent to Tongbei County. Gu Yanling, the communist chief of Zunke County, and 2 squads of communist soldiers totaling 18 were captured and executed by being buried alive. Communist garrison of Sunwu County totaling 40 soldiers were also executed by being buried alive after their capture. However, such brutal execution only strengthened communist resolve to exterminate the bandits to avenge the death of their comrades, which totaled 154 in a single region to the north of Changchun along. Another unexpected consequence of such brutal methods of execution was that the highly disciplined regular nationalist army sent to northeast China later on was equally outraged with the bandits' behavior like the local populace, and not wanting to be associated with the bandits and thus had their image tarnished. Hence they were not enthusiastic in coordinating their military operations with these bandits to fight together against the communists. Despite the fact that Chiang's government rewarded most of the bandit chiefs with higher ranks than these nationalist regular army commanders, however, the bandits did enjoy the temporary advantage over the communists, controlling over two-thirds of the total territory. For example, in the region to the north of Changchun's 29 out of 65 cities and towns were controlled by bandits, and over two-thirds of the rural area was also in the bandits' hands. In Songjiang, communists were only able to control 4 towns including Bin County, Hulin, Bayan and Shuangcheng, while for the rest, garrisons of 15 counties totaling over 10,000 troops defected and joined the bandits. The total number of bandits peaked in December 1945 when their strength exceeded 110,000.